So apologies for being a little bit late. Let's start with Tsultrim. I prostrate to the Arya Triple Gem. Thus did he hear at one time. The Bhagavan was dwelling in massive bunch of mountains in Rajgira, together with a great community of monks and a great community of Bodhisattvas. At that time, the Bhagavan was absorbed in concentration and categories of phenomena called profound perception. Also at that time, the Bodhisattva Mahasattva Arya Avalokiteshvara looked upon the very practice of the profound perfection of wisdom and beheld those five aggregates also as empty of inherent nature. Then through the power of the Buddha, the Venerable Shariputra said this to the Bodhisattva Mahasattva Arya Avalokiteshvara. How should any son of the lineage turn who wishes to practice the activity of the profound perfection of wisdom? He said that, and Bodhisattva Mahasattva Arya Avalokiteshvara said this to the Venerable Shariputra. Shariputra, any son of the lineage or daughter of the lineage who wishes to practice the activity of the profound perfection of wisdom should look upon like this, correctly and repeatedly beholding those five aggregates also as empty of inherent nature. Form is empty, emptiness is form, emptiness is not other than form, form is also not other than emptiness. In the same way, feeling, discrimination, composition of factors and consciousness are empty. Shariputra, likewise, all phenomena are emptiness without characteristics, unproduced, unceased, stainless, not without stain, not deficient, not fulfilled. Shariputra, therefore, in emptiness, there is no form, no feeling, no discrimination, no composition of factors, no consciousness. No eye, no ear, no nose, no tongue, no body, no mind. No visual form, no sound, no odor, no taste, no object of touch, and no phenomenon. There is no I element and so on and up to including no mind element and no mental consciousness element. There is no ignorance, no extinction of ignorance and so on up to including no aging and death and no extinction of aging and death. Similarly, there is no suffering, origination, cessation, and path. There is no exalted wisdom, no attainment, and also no non-attainment. Shariputra, therefore, because there is no attainment, Bodhisattvas rely on the dwelling perfection of wisdom, the mind without obscuration, without fear, having completely passed beyond error to reach the end point of nirvana. All the Buddhas who dwell in the three camps also manifestly completely awakened to unsurpassable, perfect, complete enlightenment in reliance on the perfection of wisdom. Therefore, the mantra of the perfection of wisdom, the mantra of great knowledge, the unsurpassed mantra, the mantra equal to the unequal, the mantra that thoroughly pacifies all suffering should be known as the truth, since it is not false. The mantra of the perfection of wisdom is declared. Tayata om gate gate paragate para samgate bodhisoha. Shariputra, the Bodhisattva Mahasattva, should train in profound perfection of wisdom like that. Then the Bhagavan arose from that concentration and commended the Bodhisattva Mahasattva Arya Avalokiteshvara, saying, well said, son of the lineage, it is like that, it is like that. One should practice the profound perfection of wisdom just as you have indicated, even the Tathagatas rejoice. The Bhagavan having thus spoken, the Venerable Shariputra, the Bodhisattva Mahasattva Arya Avalokiteshvara, and those surrounding in their entirety along with the world of gods, humans, asuras, and Gandharvas was overjoyed and highly praised that spoken by the Bhagavan. I prostrate to the gathering of Flekinis in the three chakras who abide in the holy yoga of using space by a powers of clairvoyance and magic combination, look after practitioners like a mother her child. Akasamara Tsashara Samaraya Petax. Akasamara Tsashara Samaraya Petax. Tayata om gate gate paragate para samgate bodhisoha. By the teachings of the three supreme jewels possessing the power of truth, may inner and other hindrances be transformed, may they be dispelled, may they be pacified. Shimtum kuriye soha. May all negative forces opposed to Dharma be completely pacified. May the host of 80,000 obstacles be pacified. May we be separated from problems and harmful conditions to Dharma. May all enjoyments be in accord with the Dharma. And may there be auspiciousness and perfect happiness here and right now. Sashi Puki Joshi Leto Tamri Ramlishi Nide
Badi
Sangye
Shindu
Shindu Mite
Owa
Owa Hirokunamda
Hinda
Shila
Shilachu Parasho
Chupashoidam
Guru
Guru
Rana
Ratna
Mandalaka
Mandalaka
Niyataya
Niyataya
Sanji Chedan
Shodan
Tsojin
Chogi
Chonam
Chonamla
La Changshu
Changshu
Bardu
Bardu
Dami
Dani
Kyavsun
Kyavsuchi
Dagi
Dagi
Chushi
Chushi
Gibin
Gibe
Sonam
Chonangi
Gin
Rolam
Rolam Ben
Pinchi
Sanji
Sanje
Druparan
Druparashu
Sho Sanji Chedan
Shodan
Tsojin
Chogi Chonam
Chonam La Changshu Bardu
Bardu
Dami
Dani Kyavsuchi Dagi Chushi Gibe
Sonam
Chonangi
Gin
Rolam
Rolam Ben
Pinchi
Sanji
Sanje
Druparan
Druparashu
Sho Sanji
Shodan
Chedan
Chogi
Tsojin Chonam
Chonamla
La Changshu
Changshu
Bardu
Bardu
Dami
Dani
Kyavsun
Kyavsuchi
Chi Dagi
Dagi
Chushi
Chushi
Gibin
Gibe
Sonam
Chonangi
Drolam
Rolam
Ben
Pinchi
Sanji
Sanje
Druparan
Druparashu
Sho Kanki tuzi ni zone tawa tamji pambi chere tambi chun denze kodam dela chanze lo. Good morning everyone. Tita kazi nga zu ngowe lewa gotsu ra ngowe lewa gotsu da ngowa pigi ge ngowa cheche ne ngowa di ta pyanda denpa chile ya ndro mundu se di ze tsamla ya rali yo samaris ra tadi haku kore te chida kulung la ya ra ngondu ke samba shuk chenpu chiki yo bayi na an chik ze chunju jimado me bayi na ya geza chunju jimado me bayi na ya di ge ani ngowa di labchen chik tenden diri drogo sari samgudus ra.
We began with the dedication chapter yesterday, and when we dedicate for the sake of something that is meaningful, for the meaningful purpose, for that to act for a meaningful purpose, it not just depend upon the substance that you use for your dedication. It needs to do with your state of. It needs to It has to do with your state of mind. In that, even if what you use for your dedication, that substance is something that is quite small or minute, still with that strong aspiration that you engage in your mind, when you make that dedication becomes meaningful. Kasan topa resnits lesson tanda conditional jelashina.
Kazi kandi kariko. Kyoran topa. Okay. Yeah.
Sesan ngwa gyawa se dila yandi ngwa gyana ma to getsa jongi nyanka yo resni sigidwa. Pena kondro getsa jongi resni. Ta dila ngwa gyawa ina tonigi tawa simasim. Dila kewa shai yorbes pena ngwa gyawa ina tonigi tawa simne ngwa gyawa ina. Ani getsa jongi ma res. Yamena sonangi tsogi dube getsa jongi res ne yeshigi tso dube getsa jongi mares ne keba dende sha yorbe sha manes.
Peshi dingi jemas tamushiba na ti zo chanju dungo mango. Tina ya chanju dungo gala ya ani korsam mimi bigwani ngo toba na ta ani lana me bat chagoras ra chagores ra ina ya kanji chanju sem gisini zoshan dungo ba ina zoshan mato partu geza di ani jongu mares o dindi sungudu
Ine dila gimtsen dende ripa gimtsen yorbe yomane.
균zen di ko pigi karso da 데브 타르투비 치 dungo shabainza ani ti mato bardo ko ani gyun tuya di ani debu ti tobro chik
Ne tena nga jimba tan wa ina rwa. Ne chanchogi kopan togi che du tanda jimba chik tan che. ine ngwa ma gyawache ta konon di chanchu ge sen ina ya ngwa ma gyawa ina kondro gets join nyanga do ine ngwa gyawa ina jongi ma rest and sigiro
jo
chezon dila ngwa sia di ngwa gyawa ina gets ma join gimtan rikpa de she yorve yomare
rikpas ke ta rikpas ke mixe ngal kisheme ine ya kansna ta korang dentop dojik ngodi zojan dungu ta dembi top sejora dembi top so shagmero samgo dingi yabu te temado ke shimaso.
All right, so I asked Geshe a couple of questions in relation to a couple of points that we've discussed yesterday in the tutorial. So one of them was, one of the questions was whether when we dedicate our roots of virtue, for example, for the sake of enlightenment, is there a reason for saying that this dedication safeguards our roots of virtue and prevents them from being destroyed by things like anger? Is this something that supports that assertion? That's the first question. Second question was whether there is a difference in safeguarding our roots of virtue if we dedicate them together with observing the emptiness of the three spheres, or whether you do it without the observation of the emptiness of the three spheres, whether there is a difference. Like, for example, whether only the roots of virtue within the accumulation of merit will be destroyed and not the roots of virtue within the accumulation of exalted knowledge, they will not be destroyed. So whether you can make such distinctions. Well, Geshe said that he hasn't seen a reference to that before. So in general, it is said that, for example, when you make dedications, when you dedicate for the sake of complete enlightenment, it is ensuring that the effect of your roots of virtue will continue with you to the attainment of the state of enlightenment. So still I ask Geshe, is there any reason, like a logical reason, that will support this assertion rather than just kind of giving it as a statement? And Geshe said that he hasn't seen any statement for that, rather than saying that when you, for example, if you take up a virtuous action motivated by bodhicitta, and then at the end you dedicate it also for the sake of complete enlightenment, it's like combining it with a force of truth, with a force of reality, which makes kind of which safeguards the roots of virtue in a more effective way, so to speak.
대신 chanchu 용은 개와야 chanchu 말도보다 데메세세 티쇼단디 겨로 따른다. 대다 잠수 나와야 추티버치 사바야나 잠수든 제로 그러스. 잠수든 제로 디기 잠수 마사바도 추티치디 엔다 아니 세요 말이스. 어디 소리지? 아니 개와 조상도 못투바이나 조상 마타 파르도 아니 개와디 다 데데그레스.
In the commentary, Geshe Rinpoche's commentary to verse 1, it cites a quotation from the sutra requested by the ocean of wisdom. And it says, just like the drop of water fallen into the great ocean does not exhaust for as long as the ocean does not dry up, the virtue that is thoroughly dedicated towards enlightenment does not exhaust until enlightenment is attained. Right? So when dedication is done in this way for the sake of complete enlightenment, it is similar to a single drop not being dried up so long as an ocean is not dried up.
디치그레셔더니 당한 독주 레반자 베나 콩주기 계작 점단들이야 아니 지다 릭망부 연구도 왔어 디치디기 적샹기 베나 잔주 셈기다 chanju sem ge tse simbi getsa di ani zoshang ge gyula drogdos tinti gi ri gi getsa di pi tachi kongju ge bedi ani tsawa ni ne pe tsame chomya di peshi yosamar samgudos ra ku gi jeb namen jimbala ya 타 르르 땅에라 소바 치니 양 점수치 아니 내가 비 짐문이 와치니 점수를 소바 딩지 좀 버마도베 베디 아니 잔주그 셈그 찌심비 게자디 아니 콘드 베디 아니 짜원이니 메바 소야디 페시 여사 말이스.
So just to think of safeguarding our roots of virtue. For example, we say that anger destroys roots of virtue. But there are different forms of anger, or you could say that there are different cases in which anger arises. So then when you think of whether anger completely obliterates roots of virtue, completely eliminates them, Geshe wonders if that is indeed the case. Perhaps we can say that it's not that anger completely eliminates such roots of virtue. It's rather that, for example, when you think of creating a root of virtue, being rooted in bodhicitta, the mind of enlightenment, and which means that this root of virtue is created with the intention to attain complete enlightenment. So when anger arises, does it destroy completely? Does it completely obliterate that root of virtue? Geshe reckons that perhaps not. Perhaps you can say that the ways in which roots of virtue can be destroyed, like, for example, the ripening will be postponed. For the time being, the maturation of those roots of virtue is prevented because of the arisal of anger. So it is a way of destroying roots of virtue, but it does not mean to say that those roots of virtues are completely obliterated.
Dere tenza bena jimba tanyala ya ani chanju sem ge se sembi ge ani jimba yon chogre chanju sem ge se masimbi jimba yon chogras yongras tenza ta chanju sem ge se sembi ge jimba slawandi da onne thane ge nyam tha bi sumjeng ge ngansu samni ani bi sem dini ninji ge ninji chimbu ge man sem ding da ninji komyaji yongras 디 또그다 섬전 탐지기 된 루트비 산지기 공부지 톰나 찌마로 냠 디 제동에 다지 아니 저소 파신 쪽이 냠을라 주고 삼치네 아니 짐바땅 와이나 딘디기 짐비 게자 디 아니 콘트로 칸드스 끼바이나야 자원이니 메버소야디 메슬라나 페시 디 약살 상고도스라 이네 델야 콘트루기 점바 아이었으나 예스 아니 점출 디 아니 제부 피기게 종알아야 갸르흔도 땅에서 소바 딘디기 용초그레스로 마도 디기 아니 제부디 자원이니 아니 메버소야지 또 이거 말았어 가서는 디 제부디 가르스는 조브 산지 공반 들어왔어 로 조브 산지 공반디 토에 메버디 콩주기 소요 말 좀에 요 말았어 로
So we create a roots of virtue, and it can be combined with bodhicitta, or could be not combined with bodhicitta. Like, for example, we might be practicing generosity, being qualified by bodhicitta, or we might practice generosity without bodhicitta. And when we do that in combination with bodhicitta, we begin with compassion for the sake of impoverished sentient beings, thinking of suffering sentient beings and thinking that for their sake may I attain the state of Buddhahood. And for that end, I will practice generosity and so forth. And with that, we practice generosity and thus creating a root of virtue that is aiming towards complete enlightenment. So anger can still arise after we perform this action. And the question is, will it completely destroy that root of virtue that was created, being combined with bodhicitta? Well, Geshe reckons that this root of virtue that was created will not be completely destroyed, but destruction will still take place. Destruction will still take place in the form of, for example, postponing the result, or for the time being preventing maturation and so forth. But still, when you consider the effect of that root of virtue that was created in combination with bodhicitta, the result of that root of virtue is enlightenment. Great enlightenment cannot be destroyed. Since great enlightenment cannot be destroyed, Geshe reckons that the effect itself will not be destroyed. So there are other forms of distractions that might take place rather than destroying that result.
There has been a delay. Gewa Zoshan Dungo Vaina. Any Gewa di any chooses drug maris. Gewa Zoshan Dungo Vaina, chooses drug maris. Jidang Moa Java Samgi, any Gewa chooses drug maris lagmadas. Zoshan's lam the Sanji Kombang Chedungo di Gewa di any Zoshan Gurn Roshagaris. Is it Taku Debu and if Zob Sanji Komata Word any Gudi chooses drug maris said that report was read or.
On top of that, it is said that if you dedicate it for the sake of complete enlightenment, you ensure that the root of virtue that you have created will not go to waste. Now, it doesn't say that just by dedicating your roots of virtue, they will not go to waste. What is said is that if you dedicate them to complete enlightenment, it will not go to waste, right? So there's a difference between just dedicating your roots of virtue or dedicating them for the sake of complete enlightenment. So in order to safeguard our roots of virtue and preventing them from going to waste, then the dedication should be towards complete enlightenment. So here there is a certain logic behind that when you consider the inability to destroy the effect, which is complete enlightenment.
Until the Nandu Chanjuk Semgi, any which the Chanjuk Semgi says somebody. Chanjuk Semgi says somebody, Yobana, any Moshi the Chunjunji model Mevana, Mod Labchin Chaya, Sanji Gurdrotuya, Sanji Komotoya, Gurdrotuya, Samjan Tamjik, Sanji Komotoya, Gurdrotuya, Tangoachi, Gurma Gusedi, Zeg Chan Mayimba, and Kolong Chanimbati. Di Jimmy Sam the Shani, and it 2000, and it Chanjuk Sam down, Tomani Dobigi, and it Lolaya, Katsu Sigi, and it Comdi Cheto, T Tsugata, and it gave a labuchi, so labuchi, sonum labuchi singing the Titon Sagaris, the Jaurumji Katuina, song that Tensandro and Jaurumji Katuina Mancha, Sonju Songo, Sonju Sonia di Yamatapa Pigi, and Nedin Shuchin. Chanjuk Samda, Tony Topic, Tav Kurang Tolia, Jarni, Sungudas, and Jaurumji Tapi Yan the song dig. One china Jaurumji Yan the Piglia, long down there, Pena, Chunjuri, Omanjubari, and it's our share Tindigi, Tsiji, Chanzang, Shongwan, and Tabo the Dangamunda, Tinangi, and Domgi. And the shoulder Kashi, Jani, deep at Kaduna song there. One is on the Semlan Jaguage, Lola Yongway read, not the Tindija Donna Chit Tugmada, deep and non duration, the Naradon, the non duration. Some good use.
So if we reach maturity with the development of bodhicitta, when we reach a certain threshold, when it is developed to a certain point, even if what we use for the dedication is really small or simple, our dedication will become very powerful. It will act as a cause for Buddhahood, as a cause for complete enlightenment, which means that it does not depend upon the substance that we use for the dedication, but it depends upon our state of mind. If it is a mature bodhicitta, that will become a very powerful force for dedication. So that through that, we will create, through the combination of bodhicitta and also combining that with the view of emptiness, virtue will become powerful. We will accrue great accumulations. We will accumulate a great amount of merit, which is also what His Holiness the Dalai Lama is emphasizing again and again in the teachings that he gives quite often at the present. So when you listen to his teachings, you can see that one of the messages that comes across is the emphasis that is placed on both bodhicitta and the view of emptiness. So His Holiness gives those teachings, and he repeatedly quotes a few verses from a selection of text from Chandakirti's Supplement to the Middle Way, from the Nagarjuna's Root of Wisdom, from Shantideva's Guide to Bodhisattva Way of Life. So it's not a kind of he quotes random verses here or there. He often repeats those verses, and by now you could say that we all should have those verses completely imprinted upon our minds. But sometimes we still fail to see the message. We kind of, although His Holiness is repeating those verses again and again, it seems that they sometimes kind of completely wash over or completely go away from our head, not really sticking to our mind. And this is a mistake, because the main emphasis that His Holiness puts on the development of these two aspects, bodhicitta and enlightenment, are crucial.
O direshata Tishidi Gauramachigita Omanjubaki Shonkachi Kadu in a Danangda Tingan Sule. The Gauramachig Kasakala Sigurda any pe do tenju yons zobalaya sichin Pargavjile Gauramji pe Shesangbu Shudada. Any do the logi Pargavjilin do this lawyers. Conjure in a bedi and yanga song the hindrance. This new songs are cousin. The piggy cousin of Ben John She and the Kenchi Junior come jogi to spot and a jar on the jargu piggy Gashan goes to the chick, but then Kanzanjula chick big storage. And that pen short and Ganny Jakor, that chick big storage ma law did the test sometimes. Anzon it is Yomnanda Yonda, Yaron this one. This new songs the telebig dom gavni and ten publisher you Gomulu and a pandit dawa trava and a jungle Sunga Chimbi tabulation also that shows those and it yan and pelojas and the Zula serious the de peshe nimatakbe sorochki sonju kadu song by na and de sungdos ra that did it. Tinzang anzu darangan droshabana the dela pigi karsota ter the mouse on the chansa lensa di telling body yacha jata masiu chagora and dig out to le and anzuta pigi tradol debana tig java daranje the tig tolaya tomo kanga and tin ragdoda and the tradon ragdo peshicina injitol been a pre total in the mancha. Canzawa Shologa Chig the Pikin Ditch said, Sama Ragdoda.
In those teachings, His Holiness has been quoting verses, for example, verses from Chandakirti's Supplement to the Middle Way, which gives us a summary of the many teachings that were given in the sutras and the shastras. His Holiness spoke about it in a really nice way. He said that he reads through the teachings of the Buddha through the Kangyur. But then when you look through the teachings that are given in the Kangyur, teachings of the Buddha, there is a lot of repetition. Like, for example, there's a lot of repetition with respect to the delineation of different phenomena, the four elements, the six sources, the four elements, the six sources, the 12 elements, and so forth. So there's the constant repetition that you find in the sutras, and His Holiness said that sometimes it gets bored because it is done over and over again over hundreds of pages. So he said that although he reads through those sutras, it was Geshe said a really nice way of stating that. Although he reads through the sutras, still when he looks at the works of Chandakirti and Nagarjuna, Lama Tsongkhapa's compilations, his text of excellent or eloquent explanation and so forth, then this explanation that are drawing from the sutras and the shastras are something that allows you to take all those different teachings on a daily basis and keep your mind informed with all those different teachings. So His Holiness says that every day or every time that he gives those teachings, which for us is like opening a treasure house that we can just reach out and pick up those great treasures. Not only that, also nowadays with our access to the net, we can easily get an access not only to those root texts, but also to those commentaries. And with the verses as honest quotes, they can be easily sourced if we just look for them online. So in that sense, it makes a life easier at the present.
Reda Jaurumji Gongneya Ya Pep and Sonju Kadu Sonaya ta Gumbuludu Dan Pandin Dawa Tagba and Chik Pek ta Kanjin Jong ta Kebi Yanza Sumbatan Jangalam Sunga Chimbi Song Digipe and Shuji Nembuchin Song Inch and Chagdos Nima ta Jinguma and Sonja Naya Mado Mixig Jangalam Sunga Chimbi Song Di Kitchenburesi Sonya Jadan Songur Dana Union Rose that then some marmot been a cousin Ningo Jawarmuji Kachuti and it Tojo Dilemma Slondi and it Jeromuji Rangi and it Sansamgi Navi Zebadima Dorduchin Song Shajus Jeromuji Rang Song Shajus Chagwar T Tola Sondi and Nga Jeromuji the Paichua in Sonje Be any casa that Kaukolea Kuzeresha, Kaukolea took Boba Chimbutoni. Any Jermuchi Paichiwadi, Jermuchi Shamderan, Shu Mes Sonji, or Dindi Anjani, Songudu Sira.
Doctrines and Dokochuba.
Dobajoba, Dojudulema.
Looking at the teachings that his honest gives at the moment, it seems that at least in comparison with teachings that he gave in the past, it seems that particularly now is drilling in, kind of is emphasizing and making it very evident that there are certain points that are held to be very important. It's quite different to teachings that were given in general in the past, where he, for example, still emphasized the importance of the teachings of Lama Tsongkhapa, but not to the extent that it does it at the present. So not only citing teachings or verses from the Nagarjuna's teachings or from Chandrakirti's texts or from the writings of different Tibetan masters such as Lama Tsongkhapa, there is such a great emphasis that is honest, does more and more of the teachings of Lama Tsongkhapa. Like, for example, recently, in the recent teaching, he emphasized one of Lama Tsongkhapa's compilation, composition, Elimination of Doubts, that is honest looked at. And he says that he and Lama Tsongkhapa came from the same place, right? They're from the same country or same place. Sometimes his honest makes a joke when he says that, but sometimes you can say that he takes that seriously in a sense that at least it's not, it's keeping up the tradition of Lama Tsongkhapa, is not bringing that to a sense of disgrace.
Yeah, cousin Jawadi, Dagi Chanju Javan Juvan, Chanju Jalan Jubur Shose, Jawadi Logira, Tenju Zombo Dagi, Sorum Tadagi, Jobber Chavi, Ten Kansachi, Sanji Tubin, Lam Jabu the Chiva Duty, Kevusum Lamji Rumbo Zoba, Yamslim Sur, Chanju Simbi Jabal Juba, Shiptu Chin Zambi, Gawa Kantova Teda. Tenjun de Cheba than Yambatan, Ten Sambi Gawa Kanyova T, Dragon Chanju Simbi Joba, Sushi Yamsulambalan and Juba Shok Cheba was Lord Jamsu Shibale, Cheddar Chudi Jamsu Chenalon, Jamsu Magam for the Temese, Teji Chanju Yongo Gawa and Chanju Mother for the Temese Jeta, Kondu Shebater, Gavan Trevo Johnson Jimban, Gacham Jimbata. Mangwana Parkos 7 Giva Namja, Namia message and Pevan Givi, Peyu Samni, Gava Chonse Cheva Namja, Simjin Kundi Chedu Lanami Chanju or Zomber Chao. Zomber Chao Malosad. Zomber Chao, Sheshin in Dole gave it our Tamjig number Tamjin Kembani Matopa, Niente the Ransanji Sarayons more, Munjubo Sheson Bataros. Gava Ten Leo Gubani Sheva Tarkin, Cosum Demet to Tobi, Sheriff Sismigan Chela. More the Malan Caberchi ngoda malam kebar che meji döshin jebu tenir gün dönbe kebar cheba malamda gü gevanım jebu gü gün dönbe kebar cheba ngos.
So we had a bit of discussion about dedicating our roots of virtue. Let's look at what Geshe Rinchen says with respect to verse 1. Actually, before we read through the commentary, let's just read through the first verse. Should have just used this. Anyway, it's too difficult. All right. But whatever virtue there is, due to my having composed engaging in the deeds of the Bodhisattva, may all migrating beings engage in the deeds of the Bodhisattva. So the commentary says, the author of the commentary says, by any virtue derived from composing this detailed exposition on how to enter the action of Bodhisattvas, by completely practicing the paths of the three beings, the path for one person to attain enlightenment, which is the purpose of all the teachings, and by the virtue derived from explaining, listening, and contemplating the meaning, may all migratory beings practice the Bodhisattva trainings accordingly. And the sutra requested by the ocean of wisdom, just like a drop of water falling into the great ocean, does not exhaust for as long as the ocean does not dry up. The virtue that is thoroughly dedicated towards enlightenment does not exhaust until enlightenment is attained. Upon contemplating the benefits mentioned above, such as that virtue that would otherwise be exhausted in the interim if undedicated, does not become completely exhausted and rather is increased, and that even small virtue brings forth a great result, strive to dedicate even the smallest virtue towards the highest enlightenment for all sentient beings. From the Sutra of the Wisdom Gone Beyond, that's the Perfection of Wisdom Sutra, dedicate all roots of virtue only for omniscient transcendental wisdom, and not for the hearer and self-liberated grounds. These virtues need to be dedicated by being held by the wisdom, realizing the lack of true existence of the three circles, the three spheres. Then we have a section a section on the difference between dedication and prayer. A prayer is characterized by an aspiration without anything as a cause for that which is aspired for. A dedication is characterized by an aspiration that transforms a causal virtue into a cause for the desired result.
Yerdadin tamadigi oadam onamlaya kebar chimbu yo maris da yinaya ani chik döshi jebu tenyi gündümbü kebar chebadalaya mulam gü gevanım jebu ti gü gündümbü kebar chebalaya oa segre sladi kanji ze yemek kebar tires ro pena simjan tamje sangi tobo shows simjan tamje döndü ani nga sangi ba shows labayna ti mulam tsam remado oa drug maris kansan ko jebu tenyi gündümbü kebar chebatsam remado pigi zeji shani ti ani jebu ti ani gü ani küvi dömbe kebar cheni ani drug mevanza o dila wars ta kanji tenza sozu tanda chonjuk pigi nganzu kan nyeshe chibi chonjuk nyeshe chibi gebi tsawa di ani zela shani tela teni ge simjan tamji gi tyendu sanji kombo tobo sho slabayna ngowa chagoras ra.
Here the section says the difference between dedication and prayer. The Tibetan says that actually there is no great difference between dedication and prayer. However, there's still some difference. So it's not a great difference, but the difference, as it says here, is the prayer is characterized by an aspiration without anything as a cause, which means without a substance for that which is aspired for. And dedication is characterized by an aspiration that transforms a causal virtue, a substance, into a cause for the desired result. So, for example, you might say some aspirational prayers, might become a Buddha for the sake of all sentient beings. So this is an aspiration rather than using a certain substance. Or you might think that by me acting virtuously, like for example, by me studying this manual, Chandideva's Guide to a Bodhisattva Way of Life, may I be able then on that basis to attain the state of enlightenment for the sake of all sentient beings. That is dedicating the virtue of studying this manual.
단 이번 거 제바시발로 좀 현된 동호와 란된 동호와 데빈 존이 템바기비 된 동호와스 담분 현된 동호와라니 직된 비된 동호와단 직된 데비 된 동호와 담분 직된 비된 동호와라시 네바 소지 동할 시비 된 동호와다 ngandu dongar shiwi tendo ngowa dendu tendo ngowa simjin kongi tendo ngowa was tambo neba soji dongar shiwi tendo ngowa la ni negabji devi tendo ngowa da tadugi devi tendo ngowa tambo negabji devi tendo ngowa ni chongnom konna ludan sum dongar neba chinyeba teda dagi sonomji dega jamzu tobar shos.
Now, let's look at the extensive explanation of the dedication, the second main point in this chapter. Extensive explanation of the dedication is divided into 3 sections: dedicating for the welfare of others, then dedicating for one's own welfare, and finally dedicating so that the teachings, the source of bliss, spread. Now, looking at the first point, which is dedicating for the welfare of others, there are here 2 main points: dedicating for mundane purposes and then dedicating for supramundane purposes. Now, when we begin with dedicating for mundane purposes, there are 4 sections. Dedicating so that the suffering of disease and so forth may be pacified. Dedicating so that the suffering of the lower realms may be pacified. Dedicating for the welfare of beings in the higher realms. And finally, dedicating it for the suffering of sentient beings. Where is it? Dedicating it for the sake of all beings. So dedicating for the welfare of all beings, with the welfare of beings in the higher realms, should be a point D, dedicating it for the sake of all sentient beings. Anyway, let's begin with the first point. Dedicating so that the suffering of disease and so forth may be pacified. Of the 2 main points, we'll begin with the second verse in chapter 10 that comes out of the heading of dedicating for the sake of temporary pleasure. It says in our text, however many sick people there are, suffering in body and mind in all directions, due to my merit may they obtain an ocean of happiness and joy.
The sajje di nawala ya tela disondan jigden bi tendung hawala neba sodunga shiwi tendung hawa seti. Gyawarum chigi tela ya tes Geshe mandrawa chigi. Tanda chonum kunna ludansum dungar neba chinye ba nyudunelin dega jamzu tobar sho shiwi kawku ani nebi pigi ne sengi di manzu ani ne di natsalai koguyo maris ne di nyam tawala ya kogu dos kansana di kawku nebi tendung oguyo maris kansana nebi tendung oya di jela yungun dosunguda jela ka yungursana shogdrang ngab gya gochu konyi simjen neba chinyeba nyudu nele taju chik sejdo o di kawsuda sungosari.
Now, looking at the outline, it says that this section comes out of the heading of dedicating so that the suffering of disease and so forth may be pacified as part of dedicating for mundane purposes. Now, his honest says something quite nice about it. It says that when you think of dedicating so that sufferings of disease and so forth may be pacified, rather than understanding that to be referring just to sick people, to those who are beset by sickness, you can take that to be in general referring to those who find themselves in a pitiable situation, those sentient beings who are impoverished, those in a pity situation. So we take that to be generally in this way, as verse 2 reads. However many sick people there are, or however many people finding themselves in pitiable situation there are, suffering in body and mind in all directions, due to my merit may they obtain an ocean of happiness and joy. So we take that in a general way rather than just referring to sick people, because later on in verse 21 it would be a more ad hoc reference to those who are suffering from sickness of body and mind.
인자 초놈권나 르단숨 둥허르나위 냠탁비 진이 여바테다 아니 소놈기 대가 장주 터버쇼세 식든지지 귤고레로치 손샤스 네비 살라야 냠탁바.
So his honest in his commentary says that rather than reading it as however many sick people there are suffering in body and mind in all directions, you can read it in the following way: however many pitiable people. Is that a way of saying that? People in pitiable situation, how would you say that? Sorry? Impoverished. However many impoverished people there are suffering in body and mind in all directions.
Then 초놈권나 르단 샘술 둥허기 심비 then 네비 살라 냠탁바 진이 바 대다다기 대와 진이 예비 소놈기 아니 냠탈이 타르니스라고라 르 대와다 이가위 강화 잠수다고 토브리 슈 찍보스.
Now the commentary to verse 2 says, may all those found in all directions who are held by the suffering of pitiable situation, either physically or mentally, be liberated from their pitiable situation and be filled with an ocean of physical bliss and mental joy by whatever merits I have for happiness.
이번 탈두기 대위 되는 거와니 대단 코와 지식도 남의 델리 냐마큐 드로빌라나 메바에 대와 주면 쳇도쇼스.
Now the next verse comes at the heading of dedicating for the sake of final bliss, or ultimate happiness, ultimate well-being. Now verse 3 says, for as long as they remain in cyclic existence, may the happiness never decline. May migrating beings obtain an uninterrupted flow of unsurpassable happiness.
대다하시던 로 대단 코와 지식도 뒤 남이야 대와 냠버 마큐칭 탈 로에 라나 메바이 대와 규미체버 토버쇼 제보 깜버시 담볼란 유르카치글레 산지 톱기 바르셰바 이나에 된다직 바레스.
So it says, may these migrators, in the commentary, may these migrators never degenerate from happiness until the end of cyclic existence. And in the end, may they attain unceasing cause for the highest happiness. All right. So you're saying that with respect to verse 2, sometimes you wonder what's the point in wishing people for just temporary happiness, in that maybe temporary happiness, physical and mental, can give them some respite, but then again, they will experience problems or difficulties. You might help someone, and you might be able to resolve or to help their situation temporarily, but then again, some point, again, the situation will go bad. So sometimes you think that wishing them just for temporary happiness is maybe too limited. Wouldn't it be better to wish them just for long-term happiness and well-being rather than to wish them for temporary happiness? Yeah. 그런 선선 가르상기요레스나 senchenggi 내가기 대화 튼틀랑와 겨와 이나르와 딜라 펜토던데 차시다 덴데덴데레사 간스나 내가블라 루탄생기 대화 녀와이나 타페시 캐칭 니발라야 마나 제말라 양갸 동에 용그레사 senchen 냥다베 senchela 로바 테스트와나 칙토와이나 양 디젤라 양갸 네서 선선 타기오 차게레스 그래서 내가기 대화세야 돼 배치지 그래서 다 든담베 대화라 뭐야와이나 야가마르
타투
그래 타도 대화라 뭐야와이나 야가마르 베스
제단 samtangdang 이 야부도스라 간선나 데디 야부레스 데이네 산지기 간주 산지기 마 최송당 토르 송당와이나 아니 가드네 약슈 짠짠디 제투나다 약슈로와스 이네 디 아니 피 두시 감다 메발에 때네 만로 타메지 차와인자 아니 용구도스 아 디지털이스 라
Well, it's a good way of thinking. When we think of something that would be the best of the best, if sentient beings can have or can do the best of the best, of course, that would be excellent. But still, not everyone can do that, in the sense that people or sentient beings are of different dispositions. So sometimes you have to provide them with what you can according to their disposition, because that's the only thing that they can do for the time being.
덴자 당한 두지 감도 메벌 때니 송구여 반자 아니 비기기 데벌 뛰인진 라 심징긴 데벌 뛰니 다 투면 제기여러스 덴자 네가기 대화마도 자원이니 삼무등엘야 그런게 되기초데 네가군 되던 덴자 콘트리비처도 물론 잡아야나 디 잔주선비기 냠는 차고레스라 들게요 말했지.
So keeping in mind that sentient beings are of different dispositions, there are those of the disposition that they can only think or do things that are temporary. And even if you try to have them on a final, long-term, ultimate way, what they can only do for the time being is temporary. So at least with that dedication, you think, if that is what they can do because of their disposition, may I be able to do that? Still, if you wish it like that, it is still included within your practice of bodhicitta.
배낭아서 내가 르 대우지 매바이나 아니 텔레덴비기 셈 대우 연구문도 왔어라. 디 마요나 타르두기 아니 대바 드비 체도 아니 라울로니제 아니 냠len 치야리 디 연구문도 왔대. 딘자 내가기 아니 대화생인디 현동어야디 콘 타르두려야 아니 펜도 여바치기 내가 그 대화디기 디콘 규르도르데냐 델테니 타두글야 펜도 진구여바나 디 드브나 디겨라스라.
So for example, if our physical situation is not good, or if our body is worn down, it'd be difficult really to use it for applying the mind to a long-term practice. So we need to be reasonably well on a physical level in order to fully utilize the power of the mind. So sometimes you might wish for someone to reach that temporary state in which they'll be able to employ the mind for a long-term goal. So in that sense, it's still okay to wish them to have that temporary state, for example, to be physically well, so that hopefully they will be able to use that state for mental development.
대회는 저 대단 코와 지식도 남이야 대회냐 보면 록셈이지. 록셈.
Jewa Lotin.
야. 단 이번 안주 동을 시비 된동 거와서 숨세. 그래.
Hardly read it. Yes, for some reason, kind of the settings have changed, and the font that I get on my, sorry? It's a new projector. All right, yeah. So, I have some questions being sent on the chat box, but the font now is so small that I have to use a magnifying glass sometimes to read it. So maybe there is a way of changing the setting. No, it doesn't. But maybe there is a way of. Even for that, I need magnifying glass, Where? Sorry. View more setting. Anyway, maybe I'll try to do it later on. So would it be fair to say? Just can't read it. Yeah. Yeah, maybe I should have asked Ollie to read it.
Yeah.
So Ollie is saying, would it be fair to say that the transformational mechanism that turns a causal virtue into a cause for the desired result be the action of generating emptiness in a mind stream via remembrance of the three spheres? Maybe it's a sign of aging. Anyway. Dila gets us the ngoagyawaina gets the ngoagyawaina ane dewo chigi ngola gyo jogires chi serto di mamikpe korsum ya korsum mamikpe zimbalatene yamana tembalatene dagara yongerebe yamana mamikpe korsum machena yan dewo dagara mi yong sigires 그런 지어 데카르스나 베시토니 타와 마심바이나 아니 게사디 제옹올라 기와 여르베스 요마데스 토니 타와 균나마 심바마토
디여서레스 라 규디 게와디 조샹기 귤레 조알야레 조샹기 귤 조얄레 토니 기타비 세나 랍체요레스 ina toni tawi zi masina ya ani toni tawi ko mena ya ben chanju semla ya chuming nyon teni ani zosan ngondi zosan gyu chanju sem zosan gyu yachi jatam dogros ta dindi gyu ti jeb pi ani zob sanji komban yons me bachebala toni tawi masen bar jebdi ming marwas ra.
Well, Geshe reckons that even without remembering the emptiness of the three spheres, you can still dedicate your virtues so that they will become causes for enlightenment. But there is still a grading scale of efficacy, of effectiveness. If you dedicate your virtue with emptiness, with a view of emptiness, or without the view of emptiness. Like, for example, even if you haven't developed uncontrived bodhicitta, you can still dedicate your virtue for the sake of complete enlightenment, and they will thereby become causes for enlightenment. But still, for your roots of virtue to become fully potent causes that will contribute to the state of enlightenment, without doing so with the, being combined with the emptiness of the three spheres, they will not have the full capacity to result in the state of Buddhahood. So for them to have the ability to mature into a state of Buddhahood, they do need to be combined with the mindfulness of the emptiness of the three spheres.
이발에 ngandru dongar shiwi ki tuen dongo wala sum nyawi dongar shiwa tang tundru tang yedaji tuen dongo wa tambu nyawi dongar shiwa la ni dongar nyurdu shiwa ngowa tang yengi tuyu shiwa ngowa tambu dongar nyurdu shiwa ngowa la sum dongar jichir shiwa ngowa tang chanyir gi dongar shiwa chanyir gi dongar shiwa ngowa tambu ni dongar jichir shiwa ngowa ni jigden kamnan yabata kanda chingi yobanam teda tunu lujanam dejin devi gawar shows.
Now we'll read through the first section dedicating so that the suffering of disease and so forth may be pacified. Let's read through the second point, which is dedicating so that the suffering of the lower realms may be pacified. And there are three main sections to that: pacifying the hell realm suffering, dedicating for the welfare of animals, and then dedicating for the welfare of hungry ghosts. When we begin with dedication for the sake of pacifying the hell realm's suffering, there are two main points: dedicating so that much suffering may quickly be pacified, and dedicating so that it may be pacified through the force of others. Now, we're beginning with the first point, dedicating so that the universal suffering of the hell realms may be pacified. Verse 4 reads the it reads, however many hell beings there are throughout the realms of the world, may those embodied beings be delighted in the happiness of Sukhavati.
오데레시다 nganzudan jigden kamgi nyewa sengindi ro nyewa nyewi kordi 제단 samgoya pe masiba kechimbu chego sares ro tayina nganzu nyewa sengindi kelen tukma tukchenchini 아니 시행엔다 년년 참을로라 약간가지 태고라서 단예와 켈렌 투마도 치지 아니 디자 가지기닝에 단다 이 게게리 아면 니마다 주메타선에 연자와 셔다다 아니 지금 나고 추고만 치야디 아니 단다 캔서로 지겐 로산 델레싱 단다 세르치 캔서 공군düğünü 쉬반자 땅이 자빌라마 안 조직 차가서 아니 공군 아니 자도네 단단히 나사디 괜찮은 자도네 라므름 세슈마기 치tin데 나디기더라 아니 두주유디 까까랑 닝기야 겐기 냐위 동아 카둘라야 다 냐위 동아디 조 직자라야 체드레스 딱 상야 체 인 제케란도 시금도 왔 제가 신나 기금도 냐위 동아디 시금이라다 겐기 디서르 이나야 이네 겐 카르송스 배 펜부슈지 나주 숑 나로라야 지 람럼레다 투주 나로라야 냐위 동아 셰강 송바디 딘지 동아지 소수 뇽고 초나 간드지어서리세 아니 소수라잔다 딘지 동아지 뇽고 초나 자원이니 서터메바치 다 용거라 딘지 초와지 끼토바이나 아니 심지한 탐지 동아 텐다지 마뇨 쇼 상야기 아니 닌지기엘이야 팽그레 송수 텐자 디베야고더라
here in verse number 4, it refers to the suffering of the hells in all places, all realms. So however many hell beings there are throughout the realms of the world. So here we have to think of the hells. Inevitably here, at least in relation to this verse, we need to think of the hells, but it's still hard for us, right? So Geshe here is in the position of speaking about it, and we listen to those teachings and we go through those verses, but still it's quite hard to think of the hells, doesn't it? Isn't it? So we do our best in order to think about it. We need to think about it. And Geshe has recently listened to teachings that were given by Kensel Lawson Delek, who is one of Geshe's root teachers. He received some teachings from Kensel Lawson Delek before, explanation of commentaries to tantras and so forth. So Geshe regard this person. It was the ex-abbot of Gyume, or the ex-abbot of Gyume Monastery, considering him to be one of his primary root teachers. So recently, due to COVID-19, like many others, he's been given teachings on online, and he was teaching from Essence of Refined Gold. Now, when he was giving these Lamrim teachings on the Essence of Refined Gold, he came to the section that explained the suffering of the hell realms. And he says that although in those traditional texts, the suffering of the hells are explained in this way, it's hard for us as the audience to develop fear of these sufferings. And those teachings are supposed to instill some fear in the hearts of the audience. So for the teacher, Geshe Kensel Lawson Delek said that for him as the teacher, it's hard to develop that sense of fear that you should get when you read through those sections like that. And also for the people listening to those teachings, it's hard to really become scared of that. This is what happens when you listen to those teachings of hell. So it says that still, when you listen to those teachings, the way to get your head around it, your mind around it, is to think of how would it be for me to experience that? What would be my experience if I had to go through these types of suffering? And then when you think of how it would be for you, then you need to think, may no one suffers like that. So you can actually use those suffering on the teachings on the suffering of the hells as something that helps you to develop compassion, and thinking, may no one suffers like that. So that's a really helpful advice. Do not choose to.
Yeah.
So if someone has experienced the health, would that be a useful thing? You mean for So when you say if someone has experienced them, like, have like a glimpse of those health, or dila Quran tiwa de kasi nyawagi dende nyamnyongi tenche tesiona yamana dende chik nyamnyon den davuchi yona dende dungele shena yamana chikta kyala pengerebes pento dende chayorves.
Geshe Jadam Pengiras de Naranzo in Bainaya, Sozula Mizenala Piji, Zada, Nezu Tindichi, Temple Yobana, that Tindijona Digmutu, Sambi Telia, Sabzo Chiagi, any Tonan the Shukshir Drugdas, did the Chikbaras,
Yeah, certainly 100% certainty that it will be helpful. And that at least when we think of things that have happened to us in this life that were quite traumatic, things, those events which were very painful, very shocking, and so forth, if we had at least those experiences in this life, we think that that is certainly not something that I or others should experience in the future, when no one experiences that.
Namki te tubin jigdenji kamna sadangi nyawata kanda chinye yobo nam tedatun lujanam nyawi dongar shin dewa chinji shinkamji devi igawar shows.
looking at the commentary to verse 4, it says, may every suffering of every embodied beings in all the hot and cold hell realms, found in all transitory realms, extended to the edge of space, be pacified, and may they attain mental joy through the bliss of the realm of great bliss, Sukhavati.
that's same thing 아니 물론 잡아이나 근데 변도 연구여서 상구도스라 다지 그게 젠되고 소리지 아 소화시라 메비톤인 로데나 팽마르스 라든드 안지 냠타비게 다메비 숨진기 아니 내술 삼니 아니 same thing니 물론 잡아이나 아니 야차 야탐바 펜사디 rangi semlaya pengyosres ro sem duryak chit sem duya kanji ani shenlaya ninji kiya ani chamba kiya dindilaya jaja jadam pengyosres tadi ro ngos kabdu le mulum jasa yul telaya penus ki malruna ngos rangi semlaya penbayna di gyuni simjenlaya pendo chiyaji yungu yoras ro.
So when you think of verses like that and you make such dedications, if you make them with a heartfelt sensation, heartfelt intention toward those beings, that will be helpful. Whereas if you just go through the motion and read or recite those verses without really generating that as a heartfelt aspiration for them, it's not going to benefit your mind to a great extent. The effect the effect of those verses over your mind would be quite small. So when you think of verses like that, you should think of sentient beings who are in a pitiful situation and generate a heartfelt emotion towards them. That would be at least helpful to our own mind. It will help our mind because it will help us to develop compassion. So even if we cannot directly affect the situation of the person in front of us, with respect to which we generate such aspirations, such dedication, at the very least, it will help our mind.
네, 당한주기 다 존중예시 제주디 아니 심전 탐지기 된도 랑기 조잔 퇴비체도 다 존중냠니 지기여라서라 원내기 존중냠니 칭이지 삼로그 아니 심하디 딘디차고라서 진짜 심전 탐지기 제도 조베 산지 공반디 뒤윤 튼동 지금 나라야 토비야기 아니 제바자바이나 디 카부 쇼즈라서 만주기 니자 추지기 samlo tang chawa chedang la samtang bayna sanji top tusare mari ti susu haku gras inza dyun tundun jig nanglo la ya ani samlo be karsota tumri chembuji miyagi samlo di kaddu hina ta tang nyingi yosa maris ro dyun rimbu chile ya ani kale gyavni ani simjingi dödün druptugenji chego sambigi lodob jig yobayna ani kawa gyungu chonaya ani gyun tuyajeda ani dindi kokobji rago wasares ro dindi chedda malam gyabayna gyasjada ma suzujulya ani lodobkiya pengyo wasares ro.
And if it helps the mind, then it will also help sentient beings in the long run. So after all, the dedication that we go through in this section is a dedication that is done for the sake of all sentient beings. And we use that as a basis for our engagement with Shantideva's Guide to Bodhisattva Way of Life, the intention that we sustain with respect to all sentient beings. So if we have any hope or expectation that we'll be able to accomplish all of that just within a short span of time, it will not come to pass. If we think about it just in relation to one passing day, thinking about what we do through one passing day, and whether just by doing all the different things that we do in a single day, whether that would be enough for us to attain the state of enlightenment for the sake of all sentient beings, we can see that just doing one thing or a few things in a single day is not enough to attain the state of enlightenment. To attain the state of enlightenment, we need to have this long-term approach in which we're committed to work hard, to not only exert effort, but also to face difficult situations from time to time, to go from one lifetime to the next over many lifetimes in order to continue to proceed along the path that leads to the state of enlightenment. So if you have that long-term approach in which you think that whatever needed, whatever difficulty I might experience, whatever might be the situation, I will still continue to do that. It will help you to develop that courage in your mind, that strong determination to pursue the state of enlightenment. No. So Oli says, does remembrance of the hells and the fear they create only serve to reinforce the sense of self-grasping, and so it's only really useful in the early stages of the path, the practice? Dila nyawagi dunge di Geshe gawa inarwa dila tene jikta ligirwa jiktak de chembo chi lewa ina ani danzin shuk chembo chagin nyanka yorwas chesan kran samna dunge gi nyawagi dunge gomba ina halam letamboa kebuchungola zo den de chegirves que si dila di gombala tene dancing chukcha den de chawaina kaduine samgorves
dende de chaga ayonas mixigi nyayu dongo gomni jigta ken dangzi shukchir drej chede ingi mares ra ngisanda ingi mares ta chedanda nganzu pigi an toni gi tela ye chi koach macha padu ani karis samdana ya anchi dangzingi ani choksora chede chagdos ne dandi jigta di nyayu dongal ya shindu chagbi chagbajile ondi nyayu dongal chi di kaddu na ta chi nyom mago ya ji tab ani tab ji segros ta dire sra lamram go dodan di dinza ta nyayu dongal gi nyom mago ya tab se ondi nyayu dongal singe de khal ten yungu yome gi tolya shimjuk chegoya kanji denji gi ani denji nyams lendang tolya ani tinging gi rambat damasuna tanshu soroti ani dongal samsu tredo asra.
Well, I guess I was wondering if any meditation that involves fear of the suffering of miserable states of existence, the hells and so forth, would reinforce our grasping at the self. Not always, particularly if you do your meditation in conjunction with the view of emptiness. But still, you could say that for our situation, if we're still to a certain degree beginners and our understanding of emptiness is not great, it is true that in whatever we do, the grasping at the self would be something that accompanies whatever practice we do, including the meditation and suffering of the hells. So it might in some situation reinforce that, but not always. Here, the main purpose of meditating on the suffering of the hells is to then think about how will it be for me? How will it be for me to experience that, to then think that I definitely do not want to experience those states. And therefore, I need to look into the sources, the causes that produce those states of existence. What will be the method of avoiding the sources that give rise to the hell realms? Which means that it's that which pushes us to engage in meditation in sequence on the four truths, beginning with the truth of suffering. Thank you. Let's leave it here for now. Gewadi nyududa lama sangye drugyune dowa chikyama lupa de sala gopara sho chanchu semchu rinpoche maje banu gegyoji kewa nyamba mebayang kone gondu bewara sho kanri rawe kowe shinkansu pendan dewa malu chungwene chenre siwan tenzin gyalzo ye shabe sindi pardu tengyuro chi tu tsu
Cham
jan
jin
chin
jang
jang
gun
gun
ja
gya
we
we
ten
ten
zin
zin
kyong
kyong
pe
pe
we
we
gun
gun
zo
zo
lo
lo
bo
bo se
cho
cho
sung
sung
ko
ko
we
we
le
le
mong
mong
du
du
ju
ju pa
pa
da
da
so
so du
du
ji
je
gong
gong
du
du
shab
sha
den
den
cho